Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is James Buratti, and I'm currently in Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin, and the University of Texas where I work. I have a PhD in environmental geography from Texas State University, which is just down the road a little ways in San Marcos, Texas. My colleague Ron Hagelman and I have done some really interesting research on Texas cider makers, and we would like to present that to you today. So let's jump right in. So first, some background. We've had 3+ decades demand for local food. And a lot of the research, we believe this emerged from people's desire, at least partially, from the need to feel connected to the community in which they reside. That connection has been lost and weakened by economic globalization and corporatization, which has created these vast and opaque global supply chains, which we interact with almost every day when you order something from Amazon. In 1996, James Shortridge proposed this term neolocalism, which he defined as a deliberate seeking out of regional lore and local attachment by residents both new and old. So these are people that are trying to find attachment where they live. Food systems were among the first to display this deliberate relocalization and respecialization movement. CSAs, farmers markets, farm-to-table restaurants, and then shortly thereafter, or even somewhat parallel, you saw this massive increase in craft beer, microbreweries, brew pubs that were also creating this sense of local. And they fostered that local identity in many ways, including product and company naming, employing imagery, storytelling, sustainability, being involved in the local community. And so this what is local or what is neolocal has been a topic of research for quite a while now. But there's very little agreement on what is local. So Erickson looked through the research and found what she called 3 domains of local proximity, which is the first was geographic proximity, which is the one we're most familiar with. So this is miles from farm to plate, or a geographic locality within a city or a county or a state. The next is relational proximity. So this are the relations between different actors, usually producer and consumer. So something is local because I can go to the farmer's market and I can buy it from the farmer that grew it or produced it, or from the brewer or from the cider maker. And then the third is this values of proximity, which is a little more abstract, but the research shows that people attribute non-market values to things, making them local. So maybe you pay all your workers a living wage, and the people know this, and they say, well, I support these people because they're paying a non-living wage, and that makes it local. Or they are sustainable, and so that helps make it local. So there's all these factors that people weigh in on what they think makes something local. Other researchers at the same time, specifically Schnell, were going in and identifying specific neolocal traits that they could identify. So what we did is, taking all this body of knowledge on what is local, I interviewed a dozen cider makers around the state of Texas. I'm sure you recognize some of the names there. And these interviews were anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes, and asked them all sorts of things about their production, their tasting rooms, where they were located, how they marketed, where they got their materials from, where they sourced. And out of that, we created what we call the neolocal product model. And this looks very confusing at first glance, so I'm going to walk you through it real quick. So the first thing we have here is this realm of geographic proximity, which Erickson spoke to. And with cider, which you could think of your cider or your company as the middle of this product, you're right there in the middle where it says neolocal product. You have inputs and you have outputs. And in this model, the closer you are to the center of the bullseye, the greater the perception is that your product is local. So in the case of geographic proximity, it's a physical input. It's apples or maybe adjuncts. And you can get those locally, or you could get them regionally, or you could get them extra regionally or internationally. And so as you move out to those outer rings, that gets further and further away from being perceived as local. On the distribution side, you can distribute on site or locally or regionally, or again, extra regionally. As you go out, things become less local. I forgot I was going to do that. This next one, relational proximity. You can see we have many more characteristics here. So again, we have physical inputs, but we have the relationship that we have with those inputs. So you could grow them or make them yourself, or you could know the grower, which is a relationship you have with the grower, or you could just buy it on the open market, in which case you don't know who made it at all. So again, as you go further out, it is less local. And then we have a number of categories for this. This is collaborations with other people or other businesses. The ownership of the business, whether it's local and private or something on the scale of international and corporate. You have owner residency, which turned out to be a big thing in Texas. People were proud to be native residents of the town in which they were crafting their ciders. Then you have non-native residents and you have non-residents. Financing, is this private or is it crowd-funded? Or yes, as we go out, is it a bank? Is it venture capital? Is it international financing? And then lastly, we have distribution. So again, distributing it direct to the consumer in a tasting room. Or you could have direct producer to a third party, or you could have indirect, where you're simply distributing third party to third party and there's no interaction there. So these are what we call the relational proximity. And then the last, we have these values of proximity. So the values, again, are perceived values that are associated with the product. In this case, physical inputs, the value that we saw throughout our interviews was the use of high quality ingredients. And that was almost always 100% pure apple juice. And if it was adjunct juices, again, nothing from concentrate. So that would be the higher quality, the perceived higher quality, and the perceived lower quality would be concentrates and adjunct sugars, brown, white sugars, corn syrup, that sort of thing. Conservation values and social values, again, these are values that the businesses supports, and the more support you show for those things, again, the more you are likely perceived as local. The less support, then the less it's perceived as local. The knowledge category is a skill that it takes to make the ciders that you're making, but it is also the marketing component, so knowing the history and the lore and the use of imagery and geography in your product and in your tasting room. And then the physical outputs, again, we have this perception of higher quality to lower quality, those largely being dictated by the physical inputs quality. So a high quality product versus a lower quality product. And again, a low and then quantity, so a limited quantity versus something that is mass produced. So is it a limited run, barrel aged sort of thing, or is it, we're just canning as much as we can possibly make? Would be the perception of a less local thing. So we're jumping right into, just to demonstrate, to make this practical, looking at one of the cideries we spoke with. This was Texas Keeper. They're in South Austin. And you can see they're right there in the middle of the bullseye. So they literally tick off every box you possibly can in the most local way that you can. And so I have some quotes here. Lindsay People is one of the three owners. And in this particular quote, which you can read, she's talking about the apples and the relationship she has with the person that grows the apples for them. So she met him online, they flew up, they have this great relationship. Multiple times she talks about the relationship. We really value that relationship, and just knowing that if he has an interesting apple, he's going to tell us about it. So they buy their apples, but they know who they're buying them from. And then they also have land with their cidery, so they also make adjunct ingredients themselves. Another quote here is their story. This is what appears on every one of their bottles. Texas Keeper was started in 2013 by a group of longtime friends, born and raised in Austin. Again, that's that native residence claim. And our name comes from an extinct 19th century Texas apple called Hicks Texas Keeper. She goes more into that, saying Texas Keeper is what's assumed to be an extinct apple varietal. Hicks Texas Keeper was first grown like just east of Dallas. We just like that no one thinks of Texas really when they think of apples generally. And so we like that it's, apples can grow anywhere, It's also just the oldness of it. So again, showing that local knowledge of history and lore is another example of, again, how they tick off all of these boxes. They also have you can see that they do large format, 500 and 750 ml bottles, limited runs, that sort of thing. And they have a beautiful tasting room. This is also their cidery. That's a plus 100-year-old limestone building with great history to it. Can't wait till COVID's over so I can go back there. The next cidery is Argus Cidery. It's actually Texas's oldest. It was 10 years old, I think, at the time that I interviewed. And you can see they still tick a lot of those boxes on the inner ring, but we begin to see some of them are empty, and we begin to see some more movement towards the outside of the circle, which means the perception is possibly less local, or it can also be interpreted as there are opportunities here to make this one, which is very local, seem even more so. They do not only large format limited edition, like these are examples of, but they also have a canning line and a bottling line. So they kind of do the spectrum. But they're also they are the only cidery in Texas that is using Texas apples, and also apples from Arkansas. So Wes Mickles, the owner and founder, he said, even here at the beginning of the company, it was like, well, we get this Texas fruit. We're not able to sit there and select things the way people can up there, referring to like the Pacific Northwest or the East. So it's more, how are we going to make this fruit shine? Not, I need you to give me this kind of fruit so I can make this end product. So real craft and skill into going to what they're making. They also talk about their tasting room experience. So we want to give people an experience so maybe they'll walk away with a better understanding of this. Understanding of this is why this one is like this one being a cider, and this is why this one is like this. So again, that education, that on-site distribution. So again, ticking lots of boxes. They don't have land, so they can't grow themselves. They're not native residents, so there's no way to claim that. But they claim lots of other places on the model. And then the last one we'll look at would be Austin East Ciders. Of course, everyone's familiar with them. Incredibly successful cidery founded in East Austin. They have an amazing amount of geography just going, if you look at that logo and the name, Austin's in the name. East Ciders is a play on East Austin, where they started. East Austin, if you've ever been to Austin for South by Southwest, is kind of where the action is. And then they even have that star in the apple, which is playing off of the star of Texas. So other cideries even recognize the power of the marketing simply in their name and the geography in their name. Patrick Kwiatkowski, as Urban Orchard in Houston, Texas, said, one of the things that Austin East Ciders benefits from is having the word Austin in it. I mean, people in New York want to drink Austin cider, which blows my mind because New York was the apple state. So there's your marketing right there. Patrick and his group actually have an orchard in New York that they are a part of and that they get their juice from. And yet when he goes home, he sees people drinking Austin East Cider. So he recognizes the value of that geography that they use. Chris Lowry with Austin East Ciders, who I interviewed, they talk about their social commitments. And so he made this example that 1 week in December, basically our operation shut down and they all go volunteer. So they always try and make sure that people are actually getting out in the community and doing stuff that makes sense and that we care about. They also host a lot of events at their cidery. And then another comment here is this city continues to drive pretty much everything we do. I mentioned we're in 14 different states now, but at the end of the day, Austin is, and that's the most important to us. We're not going to make any decision that would like exchange Austin or anything like that. It's still what drives us. And they have a beautiful building that they call the Collaboratory, which is obviously a collaborative laboratory where they make a lot of interesting ciders. I want to go back here real quick though. You do see though that the center of the wheel is much less filled in. They are using concentrates. They are buying internationally their products. I mean, they buy local products, but they're also buying products on the international market. They have large higher levels of financing, so you're not doing that. They're not doing that locally. So they have a number of items that fit in that not local category. You could argue though that obviously the name and the geography that they use there are strong enough to overcome those other items as far as being perceived as local. So now this is everybody. I don't expect you to take all this in. These four though, you can see they have that tight bullseye in the middle. Texas Keeper, Houston Cider Company, Rohan Meadery, which also started doing ciders and Perry's, And then High Cider Company, again, hitting that bullseye really strong on the neolocal traits. This next group, you begin to see some spread. You see less fill in the center, some spread toward the outer regions, so less engagement with some neolocal or some local traits. And then the last one I'll put up again is Austin East ciders, where you have much less engagement with the center and more drift toward the outside of the model. So what I would like to say here is that the model itself, the neolocal product model, can be used to evaluate your cidery or your business to look for opportunities to increase your perception as local. This is part of the ongoing effort to define what is local and to whom. And of course, we recognize that local is more than miles from bloom to bottle. It incorporates distance, relationships, values, along with numerous other actors to create a visual method to evaluate your overall neolocal qualities, in this case of Texas craft cider producers. But you yourself could do this just as easily. Questions? Feel free to find me when I'm sitting in the booth, which I will try to do as much as I can.